Hello guys, my name is Zarina and today I'll talk about how I learned to paint. Well, I'm still learning because it's an endless process. However, I have a few thoughts that I would like to share with you. It won't be a theory or a practical video, but more of a story time. I'm recording it for two reasons. Firstly, I hope that you won't repeat my mistakes. And secondly, I need to practice my English. I bet I won't mention everything that I'm supposed to, but we need to start from something, so let's do that. I need a bit of a backstory before we can talk about the learning process. I promise it will be fast. I was born and raised in a family that didn't think about art as a profession. Being an artist was a synonym for being poor. So I visited an art school a few times when I was 4, so basically it was all of my experience with art. Also, I'm not from a rich family, to say the least, so we had a budget for only one extracurricular activity, and it's pretty easy to guess what we chose. It was English lessons. Oh, by the way, my native language is Russian. I bet some of you already guessed it by my accent. Okay, let's get back to the theme because I promised to be quick. At 17, I've applied to university to study journalism. I wasn't bad at it, just with all of my heart, I wanted to create art. So at 19, I've decided to leave the university. It was a huge shock for my family, but it's a different story. I was always impressed by traditional art, and I aimed to be able to paint like that. All like that. And it's time for a reality check. That's how I was able to draw. You've already guessed that it was a long way. And honestly, I've never even dreamed that my painting will be on display at a museum and on Sotheby's website. So how it all started. A friend of mine had contacts of a local art teacher, so I started to take classes. At first, we were working with simple shapes, drawing spheres and vases with graphite pencils and watercolor paints. We had classes for 2 hours a week, so most of the time I was learning on my own. I wasn't sure how I wanted to paint because I love all styles, from digital concept art to graffiti to atelier oil painting, which made the learning situation even more complicated because I was swinging from surface painting tutorials to tips and tricks for Photoshop. I was everywhere and nowhere, so my learning process was very slow. Here are a few artworks from that period. You may say that they don't look bad. Well, firstly, thank you. Secondly, I can't take credit for that. I was drawing and painting for an hour and a half, very slowly and unsure. And for the remaining 30 minutes, my teacher was doing an impossible. She was fixing everything that looked bad. It was like magic. The artwork was starting to look better in minutes. After a year or so, I've decided to try oil paints. Before that, I was using only watercolors and gouache. You might not know what is it, because I don't think that it's that popular outside Russia. But it's a water-based paint similar to acrylics, but much cheaper. The transition from gouache to oil paints went pretty easy. I think that it was the first and the last thing that was easy for me in art. The only thing that I needed to change was a medium. I switched from water to oil. When I began to work on cast drawings, I was lost. I didn't know what I was doing. Anatomy, proportions, all those different shapes, I didn't know what to do with them. And now I can say that that's fine. The more you work on something, the more familiar it becomes. It's like moving to a new neighborhood. At first, every building is new to you, and you don't even know where to go to buy some food. And slowly, you'll meet new people, go to new places, and will eventually learn where you can find the best tomatoes, and which spots you'll better avoid. I always thought that an artist needs to know an anatomy. So like a good student, I bought the biggest anatomy book I could find and started to copy each drawing. I was trying to replicate angles, shapes, and proportions. I was learning all muscle names by heart. And you know what? It was such a waste of time. Never do that. You don't need all these names. You don't need these angles and that exact proportions. What you need is to be familiar with the shapes of bones and muscles and be able to see them on your model. A thorough copy of a drawing from an anatomy book won't help you with that, as well as calling a muscle by name. It's better to spend more time with models, analyzing them and trying to see what is underneath the skin. Example of the best anatomy studies you can find by searching for the Russian Academy of Repin. It's an institute in Russia and they pay a lot of attention to anatomy studies. If you want to copy something, you wouldn't find a better reference. This was my first issue, wasted month on thoughtless copying. Issue number 2 was colors. Colors were always my weakest spot. I knew that if you mix blue and yellow, you'll get green, and that's it. Some people can create harmonious looking color combinations. Me? No way. I always felt that I don't know what to do with them. I love them, I admire, but when it's time to mix some paint, I turn into a clumsy creature that can take a bunch of paint and turn it into a dirty mess. It was a lottery. Maybe I'll win and create the color that I intended to, and maybe not. And the first option was such a rare exception, and it was a problem. I'm always looking for knowledge and I'm a huge fan of online classes. That's why I've decided to take a course dedicated to painting in layers. You know the traditional method, when you do a grisaille, which is a monochrome underpainting, and then you add thin transparent layers of color on top. I thought that it may help me with colors. So I took an online class. I don't want to mention the name of it because it may be a bad advertisement. Well, I repeated everything that the teacher was showing, and the result was quite nice. To be honest, I was even proud of myself. Then I started to create my own paintings, and it was such a failure. The underpainting stage was pretty nice, but when it comes the time for colors, they were completely off. I didn't know how hue could relate with value. I did an underpainting, and the skin color that I wanted to had a completely different tone. It was supposed to be much lighter, so when I applied colors, it looked like I was painting with chalk. If you want to have full control, you need to know what you're going to do before the grisaille stage. I didn't know that, so I was repeating the same mistake again and again. I remember that at one moment I've started to cry, and since I was a fan of ugly crying, it looked something like that. At that moment I was working on a self-portrait. The underpainting was quite nice because I spent a lot of time on it, and I knew that the moment that I'll add colors, I'll screw the whole painting. All that effort will be for nothing. From something nice, it will turn into disaster. And I gave up. I told myself, screw them. I don't understand colors, they upset me. I love monochrome and it looks quite nice. So I've decided to give up. So there was a year when I was painting using only 2 colors, and it was quite nice. It helped me to understand values much better. But I couldn't ignore colors for the rest of my life. I don't remember how it happened, but I've heard about the Zorn palette. It's a limited palette that consists only of 4 colors: white, red, yellow, and black. And I thought, why not? If I need to start from something, I'll better start from only 4 colors. And slowly I've started to work with this palette. I loved it from the first try. When you have a full palette of different greens, blues, and reds, I didn't know why I was choosing that exact color. I was just guessing. When you have only 4 colors, it forces you to mix your own. And to do that, you need to analyze what you see. For example, you want to create this skin color, and everything that you have is white, red, yellow, and black. Probably you'll start by mixing white, red, and yellow, and you'll get something like that. You'll have to think about what you need to adjust to make the color that you were aiming for. You can write your suggestions in the comment section. What we need to add to make the right color. After a few months of using only this palette, I started to think that it needs some improvement. For example, I was premixing a lot of brown paint because I loved using it, so I just went to art supply store and bought myself some brown paint. It was burnt umber, and slowly my palette started to grow. I was missing some light blues, saturated pinks, cool yellows, and so on. I knew that I needed these colors, and what's even more important, I knew what I was going to do with them and how I'll be using them. There is a good free class dedicated to Zorn's limited palette. I'll put the link in the description, so don't forget to check it. Okay, it's time to wrap up this long conversation because my throat is starting to hurt. Probably we'll need a part 2 because it wasn't even close to the whole story. So, based on my experience, I can give you some recommendations. I was bad at everything. Some people are born with a good sense of proportions, color harmonies, values, and so on. Or they understand it easily when they start learning. It wasn't my case. I had to learn everything, and it turned out that the best way to do that is to separate things. For example, if you feel that you're bad at proportions, do a lot of studies dedicated only to that. Ignore values, colors, hues, and so on. Put all of your effort into proportions. Know what you want to achieve. You can spend a lot of time swinging from one style to another. If you aren't sure and want to try everything, that's okay. But spend some time learning basic principles, like values, color temperature, anatomy, and so on. There is no perfect way of learning that is suitable for everyone. If you feel that you are too slow or uncomfortable, try to change the approach. It helped me to switch from being afraid of colors to loving them. And the most important thing is to believe in yourself. You don't need a talent to become an artist. What you need is time, effort, and dedication. I feel that my story was a bit here and there, but please don't judge me because it was my first time speaking English for so long. I also didn't mention a lot from my story, how I finished taking classes and went to British High School of Art and Design, how I left it after 2 months, how I get to the point when I started to have panic attacks and eventually depression. It's a long story. If you have any questions or suggestions, don't hesitate to write a comment. I'm always happy to hear your feedback. It helps me to become a better artist and a better person. I hope that this video was useful. Don't forget to check my other videos. See you soon!